Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way. Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast, a mindful reminder that nothing in this episode should be considered medical advice. Today's episode will be dedicated to talking about nourishment. And we have brought on a special guest, Dr. Ann Canard, a physician who's board certified in ObGyn, Integrative Medicine, and Lifestyle Medicine, and perhaps other things as well. She is also a yoga teacher and an herbalist, and I know from firsthand experience, a violinist extraordinaire. And today we wanted to talk about nourishment because this past week, Anne and I collaborated on a retreat that was focused on nourishment and nourishing yourselves in lots of different ways. And we wanted to bring up this topic with the idea that nourishment is a prerequisite really for everything else in your life. It's a prerequisite for a life better lived. There are many ways to nourish yourself, but that if you hope to transform and grow, that you can't do that from an unnourished or depleted state. Our intention is to share that feeling nourished is an essential ingredient of life, whether it be for your physical health, mental health, or personal happiness. We hope you'll discover many different ways to nourish yourself beyond just food, and hope to inspire you to be intentional about nourishing yourself abundantly. The takeaways of our conversation, we hope, will be that you are inspired to nourish yourself in as many ways as possible. So welcome to the show, Anne. I would love to have you introduce yourself. Someone mentioned to me at one point that when women introduce themselves, it's way better than when someone else introduces themselves, introduces them for them. And it's a chance for you to tell us things from your perspective.
Thank you for the generous introduction. Like you said, my name is Ann Canard, and I am board certified in ObGyn, Integrative Medicine, Lifestyle Medicine. I'm trained as an herbalist, a certified yoga instructor, and I had a bachelor's degree in nutrition prior to medicine. And so nutrition is a big focus of mine and one of the primary things that drove me into medicine. And I live on the Central Coast of California, which I love. I serve as the Associate Program Director for an ObGyn residency here at Marion Regional Medical Center, and also am involved with the resident physician wellness activities, as well as directing the integrative medicine track for them. I serve as an associate clinical professor at the University of Arizona as a clinical mentor for their integrative medicine fellowship. And I enjoy speaking all over the country on women's integrative medicine topics, as well as resident and physician wellness topics. And I am the author of, ironically, named Nourish, a cookbook, which is a bestseller on Amazon and combines food as medicine recipes and mind-body practices along with simple herbal medicine recipes.
I love it. So she encapsulates nourishment in all of those things. So nourishment by definition is that it provides the food, and I'll put food in quotes, that's necessary for life, growth, good health. It's about supporting you, feeding you, nurturing you, strengthening you, cultivating the things that you want, encouraging the things that you want. So I'm curious what you think of when you think of Nourish. And I'd really love to know, why did you name your cookbook Nourish?
I named the book Nourish after initially I wasn't sure what to name it. And that word just popped into my head because the essence of what I was hoping to offer was not a cookbook of just food. It was a cookbook of how to live life well and as healthy as possible, taking ancient wisdom, combining it with modern research in terms of offering the body food in a way that was sustainable and also easy enough for me to cook as a full-time busy physician, and how to nourish the body through mind-body practices as well as herbal medicine. And so it just felt like the right fit. And so that's what I decided to name the cookbook.
And we are so aligned because one of the words I use to describe all of my yoga classes is nourishing yoga classes. Same idea, good for the whole of you, and healing, nourishing, growing, sustaining, strengthening, all of those things. So
right.
I also like to think of it as replenishing as another word that comes to mind. And things that are nourishing also come from a place of compassion and kindness to self. The word care comes to mind as well, caring for yourself, which is something that those in medicine often don't do a fabulous job of, though I think we're getting better. And we want to start our conversation with a topic about nourishment that's probably the one that doesn't come to mind most often. Do you want to share your insight on this, Anne?
Yeah, so the first thing that came into mind when you asked me what nourishes you was unscheduled free time. And I think that especially as women, professional women, for a long time, I even scheduled my fun. I'd take a day off and then I was going to get a massage and go exercise and do this or that. And this idea of unscheduled free time is a little bit intimidating, I think, at first. And, I think that for me to sit down and read a book or sit in my garden and watch the bees in the lavender, to follow my own rhythms, is transformative, compassionate, and pretty radical, in a life that so many things are scheduled and overscheduled and obligated. And blocking out white space, like literal white space. I keep a paper calendar, and keeping part of that calendar blank has been some of the most powerful shift towards self-nourishment for me.
I'm going to offer that I think if you haven't been taking unscheduled time, when you first start, it may not feel nourishing. It may feel quite uncomfortable because you're not used to being still and being, and it can be just a difficult transition, but that once you practice it, and once your parasympathetic nervous system and your quiet has been restored, then it can be this incredibly nourishing experience. So if perhaps you start with the unscheduled time and it doesn't feel nourishing, give it a try a little bit longer. And I'll bring up, in fact, that at the retreat this past week, several people had a lot of trouble adjusting to unscheduled quiet time where you sat and relaxed and just practiced being. And that by the end, everybody was noticing the lizards on the ground and the bees on the lavender and the birds flying in and out and sitting on the wind chimes. And that it takes your brain a little bit of time to slow down and shift into those different patterns, but that is where the nourishment and restoration comes.
Absolutely. And I think once you incorporate that into nature too, it's kind of a double whammy of being nourishing, because you have the nature component, which is evidence-based in a current Western medicine sense, as well as an ancient wisdom sense. And I think too, we get a sense of ourselves as part of something larger, as part of the seasons, that not everything is in bloom all year long. This is a natural progression to bloom, to shed, to take time inwards, inward nourishment, and then come and bloom again. And when we understand that from a horticultural perspective, if you will, I think it can normalize these seasons in our lives that also follow that pattern.
And to appreciate each season exactly as it is. I think we are often in one season, always looking for the next season, rather than enjoying what happens to be. You know, if it's spring, we're looking forward to summer. If it's summer, we're thinking about fall. If it's winter, we're always wanting to move on. Or maybe we're looking forward to the snow or the hibernation, whatever it is. It's just interesting to notice that nature is there to be enjoyed in all the seasons. And for me, sunshine is super nourishing. And so I will offer, there's not as much in the winter, but knowing that it, you know, to me, it's almost as nourishing as food, honestly, the sunlight and the sunshine. The other thought I had around this unscheduled time and nature is the idea of minimalism and like decluttering and not having all of that busyness, not just in terms of activities, but busyness in stuff and busyness in your eyes and busyness in plans. And that your idea of scheduling nothing is a form of minimalism, and scheduling nothing in your view in your house or wherever you may happen to be sitting is also a form of minimalism. Do you have thoughts on that?
I mean, I have a 5-year-old, so I'm fighting the good fight, but there's a lot of Legos around, you know. But bringing nature inside, you know, I have a lot of beautiful houseplants that I enjoy. Keeping things picked up and uncluttered as a rule when possible really does help me feel like being home is a form of nourishment, and not having to look up and think, oh, I should be doing X, Y, or Z because I have to pick up whatever. You know, it just sets myself up to be relaxed at home, to have cleared spaces for the eye, you know, cleared spaces to sit. Things feel calm. Nature is incorporated into the landscape at home. I think that has personally helped me in a nourishment journey.
And knowing it's not going to be perfect. So you may have a few spots in your home that feel calm. And I noticed you're doing this interview outside, which might feel more calm and quiet also, right?
I am. Plus I have this glorious lemon tree behind me, which I just love. And
so let's shift to talking about lemons and food. That's the perfect transition.
Good transition.
And I would love to hear a bit. I know you have special training in what we call culinary medicine or integrative medicine, and the idea of food as medicine or food as nourishment. What thoughts would you like to share about that?
I mean, this is the original medicine, right? Like Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine, medicine be thy food. And I think that we as a collective are starting to turn our faces back towards that. When I was getting my degree in nutrition 20 years ago, the divorce between nutrition and medicine seemed permanent. It just was not related to the state of health in what I saw during my training. And now we have this deep interest, I think, in how to use nutrition for good health. And there's lots of different ideas out there, but the one thing nobody can arm wrestle is the presence of a rainbow of fruits and vegetables as the forefront of any diet. And I think that can cultivate presence as well, in terms of, you know, whether you're growing them or buying them, unwrapping them, washing them, appreciating the rainbow of colors, tasting them undistracted, and using them really as nourishment for the body in a mindful sense. And things can and should taste good. That is one of the things that my book is all about, is, you know, people don't suffer forever. Nobody wants to be on a diet that doesn't taste good. You know, things should be nourishing to the body, to the soul, and elicit joy, and so coming up with things that taste good and embody those plant forward um, Mediterranean style diet that is well evidence based, I think is really nourishing.
And another thought about nourishing food is if it tastes really good, it is nourishing to all your senses, not just the taste, but to the smell and the way your body reacts to it, if it's good for your body. And so to me, thinking about food, perhaps even not as medicine anymore, but food just as a form of nourishment and nourishment. And it's important for you, but it's also nourishment for all the senses and nourishment in a way to help you feel good and cared for and strong and healthy. And that when I think of it in that more global perspective, it gets out of a lot of, I wouldn't buy some pre-processed Pop-Tart that's a fake color because that wouldn't be nourishing. So just to me, it's sort of when I think about it from that standpoint, all of a sudden it helps you make good decisions.
That's right. And I think the overlap between mindfulness and food is an ancient paradigm that is coming back somewhat. So, for example, many cultures over the history of humanity have taken some sort of pause before a meal, whether it be a prayer or a meditation, and that shifts into the parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system, allowing the pancreas to release juices into the stomach to digest the food better. The saliva in the mouth increases to start the digestive process. And food is actually assimilated better in terms of nutrition. Gastric pH drops just with a few mindful moments before a meal. And so incorporating mindfulness and nutrition together in terms of nourishment provides a superior result.
I'm curious about mindful eating. I've done several different exercises on, chewing. I can't remember how many times you're supposed to chew, but eating very slowly, finishing every bite before you swallow. And I know that for me in the summer, when I'm eating, a tomato from the farmer's market, it's just this mindful, like taste explosion. But what have you learned in your integrative training about those mindful eating practices?
They're neat. When I talk to the residents about eating healthy, I always bring some the three pleasures: berries, nuts, dark chocolate, and we go through a mindful eating exercise for all three. And the residents invariably will say, "Oh, I enjoyed that so much more," or "I was satiated with less," or "that was a completely different experience." And so bringing that into eating as a whole, I think, is a really neat new idea in terms of nourishment. And also when we look at the obesity epidemic as an integrative approach to that, bringing those principles in. One of the resources that I really like, which I have no affiliation for, is Judd Brewer's app, Eat Right Now. He is an MD and a mindfulness-based stress reduction teacher, and teaches those principles of mindfulness in terms of incorporating them into eating patterns.
My experience is when I eat mindfully, it is much more nourishing, no matter what I'm eating. Unless I'm eating something that's really not nourishing, then I actually notice how it doesn't feel right. But when I'm eating nourishing food mindfully, it feels that much more nourishing. A couple of other thoughts on things that are nourishing are, to me, human touch and connection is a way of nourishing ourselves that we often don't talk about.
That's a good point.
Yeah, so that came to mind. As a pediatrician too, I think, holding babies is very nourishing, and we've missed out on hugs during the pandemic. That's very nourishing. And just the connection of being, and actually for us, we were together last weekend and being able to teach yoga in a room with humans and even do adjustments. It's very nourishing in a way that we've really missed out on over the last 15 months.
Absolutely. And I think on a larger scale, epidemiologically, when you look at the blue zone research, i.e. the areas of the world where people routinely live to be in their 90s and 100s, the strongest predictor of longevity is social connection. It's not food or avoidance of risky substances or all the other things we think of as healthy. It is social connection.
Yeah. And to me, it's mindful social connection, so that you actually enjoy it and are purposeful and take time noticing that, when you give someone just sort of a quick hug versus fully enjoying it, which I find myself doing now because I haven't had so many, that it feels just very different in the level of sensory nourishment, I guess I would call a hug. So we wanted to talk a bit about Ayurveda, and it strikes me that maybe that's even a component of it. I know it's much more of a full circle approach to nourishment and health.
That's right. So Ayurveda, for those not familiar, is the ancient medicinal system of India with a written record of about 6,000 years of use. And the reason I wanted to talk specifically about this is there's a lot of practices and data based off of nourishment. And so nourishment, not just being food, which is very prescriptive for the individual constitution, but also nourishment in terms of thinking about how do we digest thoughts, emotions, situations, similarly to how we digest food. Do we have the digestive fire to assimilate that information as we should? And part of what creates good digestive fire, besides good nutrition, is restorative sleep, social connection, and unscheduled downtime, and the use of adaptogens and herbs, which I wanted to touch on briefly since I'm seeing more of that out in the world right now. So looking at an adaptogen is an herb that normalizes a physiologic function. And so it may bring, for example, blood pressure. It could bring low blood pressure up or high blood pressure down. And so normalizing it to the physiologic function, which is different than a Western construct of blocking or making things more. And so when you look at adaptogens, that is something that is normalizing the stress reaction. And so all of us with our modern lifestyles, electronics, etc., generally live more in a sympathetic nervous system or an activation, fight, flight, freeze state. And so adaptogens are not the whole answer, but I think a great part of an integrative approach to stress relief and nourishment. So some specific ones to think about would be ashwagandha, which is a really nice herb to take at night. Tends to decrease evening cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and allow people to wind down and have more restorative sleep. It normalizes the cortisol pattern in the evening. On the flip side, a more activating adaptogen would be one like rhodiola that would increase the morning cortisol and allow someone more energy and more of a normal kind of get up and go in the morning, which is important for people that are chronically tired, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia type people. And then one of the ones that is wonderful all day is tulsi, which is a sacred herb in India and is a adaptogen as well. There's a wonderful line of tulsi teas made by Organic India that I love, and they taste great and offer that normalization of the stress response in a very gentle way. It's not going to react with Western medications, but those can help set the body up for, I think, the things that are even more restorative, i.e., mind-body practices and restorative sleep, which are the cornerstones of nourishment along with food itself and social connection.
So it's interesting, the cortisol response too, and the stress. We all have stress, and stress isn't necessarily a problem. It's really more how we respond to it and whether our stress response is totally out of balance. So it strikes me that nourishing ourselves is the way that we can respond to stress and adapt to stress in a healthy way. And that from that, it's almost mindful about how we're nourishing, because the mindfulness is that pause between the stimulus and the response, and the response is the stress response. And so all of these tools are the way to sort of respond from a nourished, supported space, as opposed to reacting and without intention, if that makes sense.
Yes, all these tools are the boots on the ground of how do we have compassion for self and others.
The other thought I was curious about, you talked about Ayurveda and the idea of thoughts and emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And as you know, I do coaching, and we really play right to the thoughts and the emotions, and realizing that they are the thing that determine your experience of life. And I'm kind of just, there seems to be a dovetail there that I hadn't appreciated until you mentioned it. And it sounds like Ayurveda is more how is it approaching the thoughts and emotions? Is it changing them? Is it how you respond to them, the ones that are there?
It's making sure that you are adequately nourished in every sense to digest the thoughts and emotions. And if they're not adequately digested, i.e., fear, anger, whatever emotion it may have, it can throw off the balance of the body and cause disease state or issues with sleep, etc. And so it's a different construct, I think, to describe a similar phenomenon. And what's good for the goose is kind of good for the gander. What Ayurveda recommends in terms of regulating sleep, good nutrition, social connection, herbs, etc., is improving the stress response and the assimilation of difficult thoughts and emotions. Similarly, I think to how modern integrative medicine and perhaps coaching approaches it as well.
Yeah, it's really just minimizing the impact of the negative thoughts and emotions and noticing them, and then having adapted responses to nourish yourself and care for yourself in response, and or have the wherewithal, once you see them and are mindful of them, to be able to make changes.
Right. And that's a lot easier to do if you're well rested, well fed, have some time to yourself.
And we had talked a little bit about teas and herbs and rituals as another form of nourishment.
That's right. So I think that oftentimes I'll see patients taking a lot of supplements and capsules, and to me it seems very energetically equivalent to taking medications, where things are just taken for whatever ailment someone's hoping to get rid of. And I love teas because generally they taste good, but also it forces a pause and a ritual surrounding it. Usually you're not doing something else while you're handling boiling water. And so to put the water over the herbs, let it sit for a few minutes, take it out, smell it, wait for it to cool, sip it. It just has this sense of pause and ritual to it that taking a capsule doesn't. And it is really the original way to take medicine. Herbs are medicine in a long-term sense. And I think is a ritual that is really valuable. For example, when I have a patient at the end of her pregnancy, I'll usually give a Shachbari tea, which is an adaptogen that is traditionally used during transitions in a woman's lifetime. So at the end of pregnancy and birth, again during the menopause transition, and to encourage the brewing of the tea, sipping, some journaling, that you can't step in the same river twice, and that this is a sacred opportunity for for reflection and renewal.
So the ritual itself is the form of nourishment. The tea is a form of nourishment, but the ritual.
I think that they are, the sum is more than the parts.
Thank you so much, Anne, for joining me today and sharing this discussion of nourishment. Yoga is, of course, the perfect place for both of us to end a conversation on nourishment, since it's a love and a passion of both of ours. Mindfully sharing here that we had a technologic glitch with my own microphone at this point in the podcast, and wanting to share a few of the things that were in the original recording here before we turn to a beautiful mindful moment shared by Anne live from her backyard. So we talked a bit going forward about the idea of what truly nourishes you, and noticing when something nourishes you that may be different than what nourishes someone else, and taking the time to notice what that is for you and what feels good to you. What do you love? Perhaps that's not just food. And what are you inspired by this conversation about nourishment today to try? Remembering that nourishment is something that revs up your parasympathetic nervous system, your calm, your rest, restore, and that we all need a balance of that. Sometimes the energetic go, go, go can be nourishing, but sometimes that calm is really, truly what we need. And the mindful piece of this is to notice what truly works for you. So we offer that today, to pause and take the time to reflect on all of these options for nourishment, knowing that there are likely many, many, many more that exist for each of us, and allowing yourself to be you, authentically you, and notice what truly works for you. We also talked a bit about how you can find Anne's beautiful cookbook called Nourish, an Integrative Medicine cookbook. You can find it on Amazon. It's a bestseller there if you put in Anne's name. There's also a link for it in the show notes if you would like to check it out. It's really a beautiful testament to her work. We would also love to offer you all the possibility of joining us on a future Nourish and Transform retreat. We have 3 that have just opened for registration. One will be in August and 2 more in the spring in the wildflowers on the Central Coast in March and April of 2022. These retreats are specifically quite limited in numbers of people who can participate to make them supremely nourishing. So with that, I once again want to thank Dr. Ann Canard for joining us on the Mindful Healers podcast today. What a special opportunity, not only to hear about nourishment, but to be nourished by her backyard wind chimes. And if you're watching on YouTube, her beautiful lemon tree, and just her beautiful, healing, nourishing presence, all as it is. So thank you so much. And if you enjoyed listening to this episode, we would be most grateful if you would leave us some written reviews and stars to help other people find it. And we would love to share with you a beautiful, nourishing, mindful moment with Dr. Ann Canard following the sound of the singing bowl. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next week. As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or uplevel your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely.
join us for the mindful moment. If you are driving, please keep your eyes open and come back to this idea. In the spirit of nourishment, we wanted to address what's called six senses meditation. This is one of my favorites, to ground into nature, grounding into the present moment, involving all of the senses, can be very nourishing. And so wherever you are, whether you're seated, standing, walking, either let the eyes unfocus or close the eyes. Become aware of the breath and start to become aware of your sense of sight. And if the eyes are closed, you might notice light filtering in through the eyelids. You might notice some shapes or different lights under the eyelids. If the eyes are open, noticing unfocused shapes, colors. All attention directed to the sense of sight. And then leaving the sense of sight, focusing attention on what you hear. All attention focused on the sense of hearing. Sounds that are close, layers of sound, sound farther away, and even sounds that you can imagine would be there, but are just imperceptible to the ears. All attention focused on hearing. Bringing now the attention to the sense of smell. Smelling inside the nose, any odors coming in, perhaps noticing the absence of any odors or hints of anything. Noticing if there's any sense of smell related to your surroundings, almost as if the earth itself has its own scent. And then bringing attention to the sense of taste. Taste inside the mouth. Noticing its interconnectedness with the sense of smell. All sensation focused on the sense of taste. And now shifting your attention to the sense of touch. Feeling the ambient air on the body. Any sensation of coolness, sunshine, warmth. Feeling the sensation of the clothes on the body. Any qualities of the fabrics, soft, scratchy, lightly touching. Feeling the sensation of touch of your body to whatever you're standing or sitting on, supported by the earth on your feet or a chair on your body. All attention focused on the sense of touch. And now moving on to the sixth sensation, or the observation of mental activities. Noticing the thoughts that may arise, emotions, arguments you may be having with someone. Noting mental activities as mental activities only, and allowing them to fade away. seeing the mental activities from a metacognitive perspective, if you will, becoming an observer of thoughts rather than a thinker of thoughts. And now having a sense of your whole being, interpreting information from sight, hearing, smelling, tasting, touch, and the observation of yourself through thoughts and emotions. And then returning to the breath, noticing the inhale of cool air through the nose and warmer air coming out. How the belly gently rises and falls. And if the eyes have been closed, opening them very slowly, first unfocused and then letting the light in and the images sharpen. Thank you for joining me for this Six Senses meditation.